I think in the last, there's some, you may have seen it. I think in the last 24 hours, there was some discussion in the media about the English exam for the high school certificate. And there was some comments and complaints by some of the students about a poem concerning apricots. Now, has anybody seen that? Not even, no, it's not even down in, not reported in the Loftus Recorder or whatever the local paper is. No. Well, anyway, it's I've chased up the poem, and so I may even present it, and you'll see why when I do so. Why would something a poem about apricots cause consternation? So that's the question, and of course you don't know because you haven't seen the reports, and but I think it's relevant. Because when you're focusing on a topic like wholeness, then you tend to pick up not only in the general media but in the Buddhist media anything related to it, and so hence what I'm going to present today is quite different to what I had in mind, and so it means what was part 2 sits there as a potential part 3. All right, well let's meditate together. What's the time? It's about 7:36. So we could, what about if we meditate for 20 minutes? I think we've had 1 or 2 new arrivals. Got Sue, Lil's there, and Faye Walker. Well, if anybody would like to take a short break, if they want to get some hydration, some calories, look after their bodily functions. So I'll share the screen and let's see how that all works. Yep, there we go. Everybody can see that, I hope. So I'm going to be talking about this general topic, health and wholeness. So the word health and the word wholeness came from the original, or an original root. So they're regarded as therefore cognate. And then along the way, as often happens, they develop different subtleties of meaning. But it's quite a big topic, and indeed, I talk about this precise topic, health and wholeness and Buddhist practice, in 20 lectures to a course, a tertiary course at the Nhat Hahn Institute. So I've become quite interested in it, and I spent some time when I presented. This is part 2. When I presented part 1 a month or 2 ago about what this could mean, because we don't often think about health. We think about illness. We sort of know what illness means, or being unhealthy, because there's a physical and sometimes a psychological, always a psychological, I guess, component to that. where there's a difference between our normal status and the status when we're unwell, but we don't think about it in great detail. And hence it's possible to live a life and not be healthy. Of course, we can have various indulgences and not look after our health, physical or mental, for long periods of time. So one of the issues is developing awareness. So awareness probably is, hi Frank, I've just started to talk about wholeness, but in approaching wholeness, health and illness, I'm raising awareness as the key attribute. It's a very central component or quality in Buddhism, and it does require meditation, I think, to really fine-tune it, become aware of awareness. So not only are we aware, ideally, when we have a peaceful, quiet mind, but we know that we're aware of awareness. And it's a state of being that's described by so many of the great Buddhist masters. Thich Nhat Hahn spoke at great length about awareness of awareness, and just sitting peacefully with a quiet mind, looking at the world with clarity, and discovering that we and the world are one. So that's that's probably the main objective of the talk, is discovering that in a quest for wholeness, we find that we are one with the world. We're one with the universe, and that also means we are one with other human beings and with other forms of life. And it's a difficult transition to go from our normal urban modern life to realizing that there's no difference, no substantial difference between us and somebody else. And we sort of have that feeling if we are deeply in love with somebody, then we have that feeling that ourselves and the other person are one. But it may or may not last, or it may transform into another notion. So so with particularly Buddhist meditation, because meditation is required to quieten the mind and to challenge false beliefs, false assumptions that we accumulate in society, particularly from an early age, when we become indoctrinated and begin to accept all the cultural constructions of our society, all the different ways to live that are very constrained, and that's the way people do it. And that's, I guess, one reason why we are in the dire predicament that we are in at the moment, that we can't break out. And the Buddha, of course, talks a lot about being imprisoned in a cell of our own construction. I mean, we built the prison in which we find ourselves with the help of our friends. So with meditation, we gain new perspective on the world out there with its living inhabitants. And I say this specifically, many of whom are self-declared Homo sapiens. So we just assume that we're Homo sapiens, but sapiens comes from, well, it's related to the word sapience, of great wisdom. So we have declared ourselves to be a species of great wisdom, despite the lack of evidence. You know, we're calling ourselves wise, and by implication, other species like the great apes unwise. And yet it only takes a brief period of examination to realize that they live a very wise life. You know, they sustain themselves very well for long periods of time, whereas we may have glimpses of sapience, but it's probably not our greatest quality. And it's up to each of us to decide what the greatest quality might be. And then I mentioned other that.
Jonathan, I think you've frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can't hear you. Oh, speak to us again. I think you somehow went out and came back in again anyway.
I'm still host. I don't know
Okay.
where yeah, it went up, but I don't know co-host. Well, your host, Patricia, can you share the screen? Oh, you probably can't because I've got it.
Yeah, because you've got it. No. However, can you see your own screen? I mean, it's
I
probably
can.
useful for us to see it, but if it's
Oh,
going
I
to
see what you
cause a
mean. Yes,
great
I
deal
can.
of disquiet, maybe you can just talk from your own screen and we can just listen.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's see. I might be able to. Yeah, I'm sorry I messed up there. Let me just. I can
See,
talk to the screen. I've got the. I'll look at my.
it seems when you're now trying to share your screen, you leave, you fall out of the meeting, and then you
Exit full screen.
seem to come back again.
Okay, here I think we've got the two. I don't think I can share the screen, or maybe I can. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay, well, I'll keep going. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But anyway, I'm saying that with meditation, we can gain a greater felt sense or experience of our mutual interdependence with all of life. So that's really one of the messages. And as Thich Nhat Hahn said, we actually experience interbeing. So it's not a concept, it's something that it's more than a concept. We actually experience that we are living as one with the living world. Now, I'm just going to move, with all these slides I presented last time, so I'm going to move right through them until we get up to number 26, and that's where we are going to resume. So we have a perception of our various domains. We often think of ourselves as comprising different domains, the physical or somatic, emotional, cognitive. So we have all these different aspects, our social state, our relationships with people, some closer than others. So we have a sense of stateness. We have a state, we're in a certain emotional state. And so we've divided ourselves up to some extent, often. And but sometimes this does leave us with a sense of incompleteness or even woundedness. Many people, of course, are traumatized in their early life. That's a sense. So trauma means wound, and so we now know that it could be as many as 50% of children growing up into adults nowadays have significant trauma, unaddressed trauma, and it's not addressed unless it reaches a crisis point, which it may or may not. And if it does so, it may not be till middle age or even later in life. And it could be due to something unintentional, the lack of love or obvious love or sufficient love when they were young. There might be a sense of abandonment by parents, which was not intentional but happened, and so forth. And it does play out. And sometimes it's not really that clear. And so people may eventually come to meditation. I mean, they may go to lots of places before that. So these various states that I mentioned are not static, they're impermanent, they're evolving, interconnected. Sometimes they're dreamlike, and sometimes it's a bit like the mixing. If we imagine various people together, may be close, quite often, sometimes imperceptibly, maybe their feelings are mixing with the feelings of others. So a bit like steam from two kettles mixing together.
Mm-hmm.
And this phenomenon was raised quite some time ago by an American woman, a psychiatrist, who wrote a book called Mixing Minds, The Power of Relationships in Psychoanalysis. And she came out to Sydney, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and was brought out by the group ABCAP, which is the Australian Association of Buddhist Therapists. And she spoke a lot about this. And there are many other fairly modern Buddhist inclined psychotherapists who in their work, they allow their mind and the mind of their client to mix. So it's really a very deep state of compassion. And that way they can understand the mind of the other. And the other is aware that that someone truly understands them. Now, the word evolve, which we often use, comes from the Latin, and it means to unroll or to roll out, to roll forth or unfold. So you can imagine that in the process of meditation, this is what's happening to our mind and our sense of ourselves and the world. And trauma or woundedness from early in life may leave a space within us, and that's often a driving force to identify the space which is causing us discomfort. It may be the freezing or frozenness of development of ourselves at some point. It may be at the point where we are developing, yes, so that's moving on. So I've mentioned some of the components of ourselves. The spiritual dimension I mentioned last time, I'll mention it again. How do we know that we have this spiritual domain? And is it really ours, or is it collective? And what is it? Where is it? How can I gain more experience? Can it be understood? What about consciousness? The mind and consciousness have been and remain a major focus of Buddhism, of course. But do they have somewhere that they exist? How can we make contact with them? And one person, Ken Wilber, who you may know, has spent his entire life really looking into this matter, and he feels that there's a perpetual human search for growth and fulfillment. And of course, this has been a theme really throughout the history of humankind. And the wisdom of spirituality, psychology, he says it's important to do shadow work, to look at what lies beyond our perception, perhaps in the shadows. Science has a place. And ultimately, he says to obtain wholeness, we should be considering these various steps. Now, waking up is what we achieve with meditation. Waking up, becoming woken up, and identifying the true nature of reality and our place in it. But quite often, this is not possible until we have grown up. And I think I did talk once about spiritual bypass, which is a problem that often arises when people begin meditation. They're trying to wake up, obtain some spiritual wisdom, because their life feels incomplete or less than whole. So they have a problem. They have a sense of being incomplete. And so they want to take up meditation. But that incompleteness that they feel is probably an issue of their growing up through their life from childhood. There has been trauma, a wound which remains, which persists, and that has to be attended to first. So that comes under growing up. And there may be other issues, opening up to the world instead of being closed, cleaning up, showing up. So there's a number of steps that Ken Wilber talks about in his view in order to ultimately become complete, with waking up being the ultimate. Now, I wanted to say a bit about a book that did come out, became available to me at least since I last spoke to this group. And it relates to really a Tibetan teaching by an author called Anne Klein, who's a well-known American Tibetan Buddhist scholar, professor of Buddhist theory. And so this has been a lifelong quest of hers. And so she's written a book called Being Human and a Buddha Too. And it gives a wondrous glimpse into the deepest of all Buddhist teachings, demonstrating that each of us, no matter how flawed and how we determine if we are flawed, how do we know that, can find a pathway back to wholeness. And so this has been a preoccupation of the Dzogchen practitioners. And I'm not going to say much about Dzogchen, except that it is very relevant in the modern world, no matter what type of Buddhism we practice. And there are these 7 trainings or contemplations: impermanence, the adventitiousness of happiness, the way that it just turns up and then goes away, the multiple causes of death, and I guess implying that there is a sense of death even before we die physically, the meaninglessness of our worldly activities, the reliance on the Buddha's good qualities, and of course in Tibetan Buddhism, we identify Buddhahood within ourselves. So in other words, there is the belief that we all contain a Buddha. In other words, a perfect sense of ourself. So that we we identify this purity within ourselves, and then we can spend time developing it and allowing it to flourish within ourselves. We don't have to seek it elsewhere. That's one of the keys. We have this sense of being less than complete, but strangely and ironically, we have wholeness within ourselves. And then there are the teachers. The pith instructions are just very abbreviated instructions from a teacher to a pupil. And then we develop ultimately, and this is the goal within the Dzogchen tradition, a non-conceptual meditation on bliss and emptiness, clarity.
Technology is not our friend tonight, and I'm not a great troubleshooter. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not quite sure what's going on, but anyway, I'm sorry for the interruptions. So moving on. So the aim is this unbounded wholeness, which is common to Dzogchen in Tibetan Buddhism. There was a type of Buddhism called Bon in Tibet, which was thought to be present before the Buddhist philosophies arrived. And they both talk about the non-conceptual. So the non-conceptual is really a state of our mind when there are no concepts, there's no cognition. And this is what I was talking about before. This is pure awareness, awareness of awareness. We're just simply aware of what arises. And it's quite different to what we would normally experience when we open our eyes and go about our daily activities. So and it's an unbounded wholeness that we feel, including an indefiniteness. And it's not easily understood by reasoning. In fact, reasoning gets in the way. We can't cognize or think about all of this because it's beyond that. We can return to a cognitive life and an intellectual life, as, for example, the Dalai Lama does every day. So when he meditates, he enters a state of unbounded, non-conceptual being, where he feels very comfortable. And so in terms of this book, just referring to what she says, she talks that we're children of the universe. So we arose within this universe and connect to it. But somehow we to a large extent, feel separate from it. I mean, we look out at it without thinking that we're part of it. And sometimes we yearn to be more alive and more engaged with the universe. And this is a sort of universal basis for striving and development, is the sense of incompleteness, a lack of wholeness, and therefore we strive and do whatever we can to really correct that deficiency. So that's one of the points I'm making. And it's achieved generally through awareness, through meditation, because if we can end all the arguments and discussions that have been interminable and then just experience the non-conceptual. In other words, we see just what is there. We don't have to develop a concept. We just simply see what is there, and it's non-dualistic. In other words, we are not separate from it. So when we experience it, we are there. We are part of it. And so the passion for wholeness recognizes life's inestimable multiplicity. So it has many different states. And of course, it's impermanent. It moves from one state to another all the time. And often when we're meditating, we can't really name or describe these different states. We just pass through it. But it is a very refreshing and flourishing experience. Yes, so Dzogchen means the great completeness, as I mentioned down here. And it's an all-inclusive state of reality that emanates from me. Thus, I am only one. Knowing me is knowing all. Great bliss. And so we can have this moment of awareness. It's readily available at any time. And it really reinforces the state that I am. I am already there, already whole, already complete. And as an exaggerated sense of agency subsides, where we want to do things and manipulate the world, we stop doing that. This is replaced by a sweet surrender, allowing a relaxation into the life. And as Klein puts it, this state is backlit by completeness. So it's a sense of plunging into the unknown, where we're not trying to control the view of the universe that we have, that is constructed by the life that we've already experienced, and it is separate. We are unaware of this this actuality of life, and there's an interdependency behind all the great developments, behind climate change, migration of humans, economic disparities. These are all the consequences of not realizing that we are all one. It's a big deal, and it's hard to imagine this becoming a universal understanding. Now I'll just move on. So there's no real barrier between our ordinary and our awakened states. And indeed, sometimes we get, this is really in the area of epiphanies. Sometimes we get a serendipitous, so an unexpected, unplanned glimpse of awakening. Sometimes we may just be in a natural scene, a setting, and suddenly we get overwhelmed with joy or excitement. We suddenly see the world for what it really is. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences, quite often in childhood. Children at a certain age, provided their life hasn't been a complete disaster, before they've been conditioned, they will have these experiences. The Buddha himself had a well-described experience when he was a young man sitting under an apple tree looking at the fields. And there are other great epiphanies in literature, where people suddenly see the world around them, perhaps a group of people. I think it was W.H. Auden described such an epiphany when he was sitting with friends one evening in Oxford, and he suddenly saw them and himself as one. He suddenly felt this overwhelming sense of love for all his companions, and it shook him. He dropped a glass of wine, and he just realized that that was the truth. And he understood them as close friends, but he was always diminishing the potency of the relationship and the amount that he depended upon these other people. So it's important to shed our identification with the one who is stressed. That's us. So we're stressed by the ubiquitous nature of our lives. I mean, it's easy to talk about this, but that's the case. And we just see how further and further we are retreating away from the reality which is there. And unfortunately, and this will vary from person to person, each of us, and of course, different days, different times of the day. And I guess if you're wandering into the national park or going into nature, then provided you've got no phone connection, you're going to have these sorts of experiences. I mean, that's what draws us into nature, where we enter a natural environment, which hopefully is still pristine, and just relate to it and ask for permission, really, to join the natural world. So the great completeness practices, even though they were developed in Tibet of all places, are so relevant. I'm not suggesting that we all become deeply involved in these specific practices, but they are relevant to our daily practice with our meditation. And I think it's that we should be thinking big, and thinking that if we can just stop thinking and just become really aware of awareness itself, because awareness of awareness, that is neutral. It's not tied up with our emotions. So we can be aware of our emotional state, but that awareness is cool. It's not involved. It can see that we're churning up with emotion, and it just notes, yes, I can see anger, but it's not consumed by it. It's separate from that. It's separate from the love. It's separate from the limited views that we have. And it's just like a neutral commentator, but it's not separate from us. It's part of us that's simply aware of this day-to-day manifestation. And so if we can identify it, it is so helpful because it provides a guide. And so our innate wholeness dissipates, if you like, or it diminishes the separateness that normally structures our experience and allows us to discover the vast expanse that is our true nature. And the point is made that there's only the merest wisp between Buddhas and humans. And we just have to stop being, if you like, average, ordinary humans and allowing our Buddha nature to manifest. And we yield this reduction in much of the pain and restlessness and dissatisfaction of life. And I know Anne Klein was reporting on a friend, and I think an academic friend who was in the same department of Buddhist studies, so somebody who meditated, who was traveling to Venice and just turned a corner in Venice, was looking at all the buildings and the scenes and so forth, and then suddenly something around the corner, the play of light, the trees, the water, and so on, became overwhelming, and that person just collapsed to the ground with the force of it, and his wife was following and just thought he'd had some medical emergency, but he was just on the ground, lifted himself up and was just weeping at the beauty of it. And he was a sensitive person, but he'd never had that level of identification with beauty. And he saw the beauty, he saw that he was part of it. Just trying to get the screen, not happening.
No. Maybe it's been the storm, as Frank said. It seems to have passed, but perhaps it's created some kind of disturbances.
Yeah, may have been. Anyway, we'll try and let me just try once again to get the all right, well, I will continue. Can you see the screen at all?
No.
Okay. All right, well, I'll just continue on because I can let me just see if I can move that around. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I can continue because I can see it. And yes, okay. So Dzogchen, the great completeness, holds that wisdom is present in both mind and body. And the wisdom is not about something external. It's about pure knowing, simply knowing itself, the process of knowing. It doesn't gaze outward or inward, but wakes up to its own nature, which is incorruptible. Everything we experience is in the field of our knowing. There is no out there beyond that. There's no place, there's no new place to discover. We are already within it. And it's not something to take anybody else's word for. We have to experience it ourselves. And one person said, in a flash, something previously invisible was suddenly as obvious as the noonday sun. There is no separation between knowing and what I knew. Knowing and known were equally part of the blue sky and the water. The horizon felt as intimate as it was vast. So this concept of Dzogchen, if you like, or the great completeness, emphasizes that awakening to our own true nature is basic, intrinsic, and available to everybody without exception. And we can see that there are limitations of the ordinary mind, and we decide to try an alternative. And it represents a crucial fork in the road of our meditational practice. The key to awakening is learning to get out of our own way. And she says, my everyday mind, ingeniously protective of the ego, the me, that is its main devotional object, balks at undoing the identities by which I carve out my separateness. I easily forget that being different and being separate are not at all the same thing. Wholeness is compelling precisely because it embraces all difference. So that's the difference between being separate and being different. We're different in all sorts of ways, but we're not separate. In fact, we're all part of the same unity. So I long for wholeness to the extent that I feel burdened by the existential loneliness of separation and the aggressiveness born of alienation that often results, so the aggressiveness of humankind that we've seen in recent days. At its most fundamental human level, wholeness can heal. So wholeness comes from the word heal. So one can learn to relax, to let go and tap into something of deep awareness. And relax, if we think about the word relax, what does that mean? It means to make something less compact or dense, less tense, to soften, set free, loosen, open, stretch out, be slack, be languid, be spacious, to make less severe or rigorous, to be at ease, to release the grip on me. Now, I wanted to just say a few more things before I pause for some discussion. Let me just see. I don't think I can. Let me just see if I can.
Jonathan, we've only got about 20 minutes left, so
I'm just going to make one further point.
Oh, no, I wasn't meaning to interrupt, but I know that it's been a bit kind of difficult. But just to let you know that we've got about 20 minutes left.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to mention, just moving on from Anne Klein and her book, there's another intelligent person, Ian McGilchrist. I'm not sure if you're aware of him. He's an Englishman. He was a psychiatrist, neurologist, and philosopher, and he's very enthusiastic about the power of meditation, and he studied the brain, and he made some really important distinctions between the different sides of the brain, and he says the most important aspect is this aspect of attention that I've been talking about, the power of attention, because if we look at the left and the right, we find that the left side of the brain is very focused specifically on what we can see, but it's very fragmentary, and it likes to make decisions and define things and label things. And that's the dominant hemisphere of the world today, whereas he says the right side is very broad and open, can sustain attention, and that's the part of the brain that really connects with the universe, because it's completely open. It doesn't compartmentalize things. And so he makes that point. And in fact, he wrote his first book, well, the most recent book, called The Matter with Things: Our Brains, Our Delusions, and the Unmaking of the World. So he thinks it's very important, even when it comes down to love emanating from the right side, because the right side of the brain is very unconditional. It's very open and inclusive, and it reflects the nature of the world itself. Whereas the left side is an aberration, if you like. He makes the point that it's very important because the left side gets us through the day. It can make very quick decisions based on what's happening if we're in the traffic or if we're in a crowd of people. It's important to engage with other people. So it does that, but it's not a big concept part of our life. And so if we look at this is a lovely description. So here you can see the left side and the right side of the brain. And this is really somebody's head who's looking away from us. And so the left side, you can see everybody's in these little workstations, isolated, separate, looking at a screen. They're not looking at the world, they're looking at a screen. And so it's all very detailed, unnecessarily so. That doesn't mean it's real. It's just detail is created. Logical, sequential, rational, analytical, objective, and so forth. Whereas the right side is creative. It's a big picture. It's intuitive, holistic, philosophical. The sensation of I can get it. oh, I realize, I understand it now, and so forth, full of imagination, symbols, and so forth. So that's sort of one way of looking at all of this. Now, in conclusion, I just wanted to consider two poems, if I may, and then we can have a discussion. The first one is called In the End, by this wonderful American poet. And I'll just read it because it's relatively brief. In the end, you won't be known for the things you did, or what you built, or what you said. You won't even be known for the love given or the heart saved, because in the end, you won't be known. You won't be asked by a vast creator full of light, what did you do to be known? You will be asked, did you know it, this place, this journey? What there is to know can't be written. Something between the crispness of air and the glint in her eye and the texture of orange peel. What you'll want 1,000 years from now is this, a memory that beats like a heart, a travel memory of what it was to walk here, alive and warm and textured within. Sweet brightness, aliveness, take me nowness, that is life. You are here to pay attention, that is enough. So I think that's a good point to stop. I was going to move on to that poem I mentioned about apricots. And I can simply say that about apricots, the problem was that he describes at the very end, the poet is the poet laureate of New Zealand. And right at the very end of the poem, he's discussing with his companion the wonder of the taste of apricot, in the moment, enjoying the flavor of apricot, and how the flavor reflects the color of the apricot. You know, you taste the color. And so he's talking about the being consumed by the process of enjoying an apricot in the present moment, when there's nothing else happening except eating an apricot. And one can understand that might have baffled some younger people in an exam where they had to interpret that poem. Perhaps because young people, many of them, at least those that complained, hadn't had that clear experience of being in the moment.
Mm.
So I'll leave it there and open for any discussion that might arise.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think probably I'm a little bit with the students. Not that I don't understand what you were just saying there at the end, but I think this is for me quite kind of really quite difficult concepts. That idea of awareness, and just that. I think you've covered what I think is quite a difficult topic. I'm maybe that's not how other people feel it, but I think it's quite challenging to try and really get your head around these ideas.
I'll stop sharing. There we go. Well, I guess at the least sometimes people have the experience about their life. And in fact, strangely, just to bring it to another level, I don't see patients as much as I used to, but I did see a few patients today, and one of them you would regard as perfectly well. I mean, he'd had treatment in the past for a bowel cancer. It was removed, I think, 11 years ago when he was 49. And I see him routinely ever since. He had some chemotherapy, and I see him. Oftentimes, the doctors would say after 5 years, well, you don't really need to come back, but he was very keen to. So he turned 60 in August. And he said I knowing that 60 can be a big milestone, and he raised it himself, the fact that he turned 60. And so I said, well, what was it like turning 60? And he said, well, it's been a big deal, because he could see 60 coming for a few years. this point in his life. And he said it was very unsettled. And so he was looking for other ways to occupy himself. I mean, he's got a very secure job working in a successful restaurant. He's got a lovely family. And in fact, he was talking to his wife about this. So they have a relationship where he can say to her, I'm feeling really unsettled and I don't know what it's about. I mean, can you imagine a relationship? I mean, you probably do, but I find it, I tend to think that's unusual, that a man could say to his wife openly and intimately, I don't know what's happening to myself. I feel really unsettled. And it's nothing to do with the family. It's something that I don't understand. What do you think? And then, not surprisingly, she turned out to be far wiser than he was. And so she could pinpoint the fact that he was dissatisfied with what he'd achieved in his life, despite everything. I mean, a lovely family and financial success, barely. I mean, he still has to work. But she was aware too that there's more. And so they were talking about that. So that just came up today, and we spoke about that with only peripheral mention of the cancer and so forth. We're talking about, because I mean, if he died of his cancer, it wouldn't be an issue, but he had that, and perhaps there was some origins of this way back at the time of his cancer, when people with cancer quite often think they may die, regardless of what prognosis the doctor gives them. The doctor says, oh, no, this is no problem. We'll take it out. And the chance of it coming back is less than 1%. Well, of course, people in that situation aren't rational. And they think, well, less than 1%, but it's still more than zero, that it may come back and I die. And so they're thinking about death and life. And so, but anyway, it became an issue, a bigger issue. And he actually had to see a psychologist. It seems that he must have seen someone pretty clever and pretty smart, because he said he felt quite a deal better after 4 sessions. He could have had more, but I guess time will tell. But that's just one example where people in the community can be having these feelings, but they're not part of the normal conversation. And I guess being a doctor or an oncologist, you're in a privileged position, because you're entitled to in some ways to explore that territory. And let someone decide how much they want to talk about it by just saying, well, how did you enjoy your 60th birthday?
Thank you, Jonathan. If I may say a few words. At the end of the 60s, I was with a Japanese group, not Zen, Rissoko Seikai, where they had no monks. You were your own teacher. And they told me off because they said, Frankie is in a mental rut, worrying about dukkha. Always dukkha. I had a hard life. So, and then I got to know Ayakema, who told us that the underlying law of nature is dukkha. And I 100% agreed to it. And now that when you said that this feeling of separateness is one of the major causes for dukkha. And then slowly I realized that when I have problem, suffering, whatever, it's not my problem and suffering, but somehow belongs to everybody. It's a feeling, hard to explain, especially my limited English is always stopping me. But now I can see it clearly that this separateness, this I, me, myself, as Gilligan said in Gilligan's Island, that I love me, I, and myself, is giving us the major problem. Now that we have the wars, and we always take sides, where is the wholeness there? to support Israel, to support the Palestinians or the Ukrainians or the Russians. It's a terrible thing, not war in itself, but always this. You have to support someone. You have to take sides. And it's one of the worst things we can do. You think I'm right about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think what was one of the cruelest manifestations of this delusion of separateness. And I mean, if you saw children playing, I mean, I've seen the images forever of Israeli and Palestinian children playing together. I mean, like 4 and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, they have great time together, and they don't see any difference. They love one another. You know, they hang around together. They put their arms around one another, don't they?
Yes.
And they talk, and they have wonderful experiences, and they go home to their mummies and daddies and say, boy, I had a great time. And the parents probably have their own thoughts about enjoy it while it lasts. Well, I can't understand. Maybe they think, I can't understand why you love that little Palestinian girl so much. But you're right, it's this separateness. And it's all pervasive and cruel. And when I say all pervasive, I mean it's present everywhere. It doesn't involve every person. There are so many people in our community, and we all know them, who just feel they're just at one with everybody. I mean, there are people like that in the community, but there are so many others who just seek to define a difference, a barrier and separateness. And it's coming up with the referendum. And but with climate change, we'll have to make a decision between extinction and survival at some point. And so people are going to have to consider their own separateness and take this plunge. You know, and it'll be incredibly painful because so many people are separate, and they're convinced that they're separate. They're part of a group of people that are separate to another group. And the separateness may go back generations. But it's reached the point where it's survival. And I guess some people feel so entrenched in their separateness, they're prepared to die for it. Yes. I mean, I guess the Hamas soldiers must have felt that way. And then the Israeli soldiers who are retaliating feel the same way. And so it's reached the point really globally where it's a matter of life and death. But I think all we can hope to do ourselves is really what I've been talking about, at least through meditation and awareness, and awareness of awareness, at least. And then I think that poem says it too, that if we just imagine ourselves 1,000 years from now, so not in this life, but some little corpuscle in eternity, thinking back, well, I was there having this finite life, and my role was to experience it. I mean, I had the capacity to experience all these different aspects of it, without imposing myself on it, but just to absorb that experience, how brief it was. And that's our role. And I love it because it means we're treading very lightly on the earth. We're just curious about everything, and trying not to really damage anything, not to leave a footprint, and being respectful of all other life forms, and just being so interested in the life of a bee or an ant or a leaf or whatever. And if we can all just creep around like that, and what Anne Klein's saying with her examples and all the other epiphanies, this can be a magical life doing that. And there's so much magic and wonder in life.
Well, that might be a beautiful place for us to conclude, the magic and the wonder. And for me, I think it's going back to that list, wake up before even doing any of the other things. So Thank you very much, Jonathan, for persevering with the technical conniptions tonight. Well done. And thank you everyone for joining us. Just a couple of quick announcements. It's time to renew your membership of the association. And if you're not a member, then it's time to join. It's $60 a year. And the way to do that is to go onto the website, Association of Engaged Buddhists, and you can make a payment by direct debit in that way. So please have a look at the website if you don't already do that or get the newsletter. And also next week we'll have Bhante Pandit speaking to us. And the week after that, we have Tay. So I was going to try and screen share those posters, but given what's happened, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to tell you that's what's coming up. Next week, Bhante Pandit, the week after Tay. And if you're interested in a retreat at Vajrasala, the first weekend in December with Graham White, there'll be a weekend there. I was there just earlier this week and it's looking terrific. So if you don't know the retreat centre and you've got any interest in a weekend away, doing some meditation, tasting the Dharma, Graham White's going to be running that again at the beginning of December. So again, the information's on the AEB website. So any other announcements from anyone else in the Zoom room?
Well, I do know that Kynan is going to be running a 3-night one at Vajrasala in January.
Oh, excellent. I haven't got the information about that. But again, if that's of interest to you, maybe do you know the dates, Bill?
Yes, it's the 25th that commences.
Oh, the long weekend.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's terrific. Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks. And also, I think Kynan's doing a day of practice at the Buddhist Library on the 12th of November, and that information is on the Buddhist Library website. So thank you all very much. I wish you all a safe evening, and the awareness of awareness. It's a challenge for me, certainly. So,
Thank you.
Would somebody like to dedicate merits? I know we don't ordinarily do it, but anybody?
May I?
Yes, please.
May the merits made by me now or at some other time be shared among all beings here, infinite, immeasurable. By rejoicing in this cause, this gift of merits given by me, may beings all forever live a happy life, be free from hate, and may they find the path secure, and their good wishes all succeed. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu.
That was Prakantipalo, going back 50 years.
Thank you. And that's a beautiful way for us to end our evening. And again, great thanks to you, Jonathan, and for your great grace in dealing with our technical difficulties. Good night to you all.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night.